All right, welcome back to episode 11 of my Dodge Raider rebuild project. It has been a few weeks since I posted a video because I came down with a chest cold and spent a few days on feeling sorry for myself on my couch. And then we got a snowstorm here and it became very cold, and my motivation for hanging out in the garage at 16-degree weather was pretty low. So I did find some time out here to fix a few things this last week. And let me show you what we've been up to. Ordered a new set of gauges, primarily the oil pressure gauge, which had an aftermarket in this car, and I wanted to have the stock looking gauge, so I ordered a new gauge set off of eBay. It showed up, it looks really nice. All right, we had some parts come in this week. I ordered a new set of gauges here. I was complaining about the oil pressure gauge on my original that was changed over to an aftermarket, so I found another one on eBay that has the original oil pressure and everything else. So I would just swap out the housing to the brown, and that should work. I found it for about 47 bucks, I think, on eBay. And then also we got the heater core that came in, so we're going to open it up here and see what it looks like. So here's the heater core out of a 62 Chevy 2 or a Nova, and the dimensions are very similar. What I'm going to do is repipe it. The piping is a little different, but it's in this top location, so I can repipe it, cut those off and spin them around. But I'm going to put this inside the air box and see what the dimensions are, see how tightly it's going to fit, because it looks like it's very similar in size. I spent some time working on the heater core. I had a heater core show up. I ordered from for a 62 Nova or Chevy 2. It had the same dimensions as the heater core that I pulled out of this car. So I have a little bit of video here showing you how I repiped the hoses so that it would fit this car. Okay, we're working on this heater core tonight, and the new heater core does in fact fit right in the old slot almost perfectly, except for it sticks up about 3/4 of an inch too high. So I'm going to do a little bit of surgery on it. This is the mechanism that shuts off the flow of hot water to the heater core when you turn the heater off, and it's up about 3/4 of an inch higher than it should be. And so what I'm going to do is cut off with these pipes here, and we're going to extend the screw holes where this screws down, and then we're going to adjust some of the arms for these trap doors. And ultimately we're going to make it work. That's what we're working on now. Alright, we cut through these two pipes here. So now we can plumb these. This water cutoff will be piped into this front one, and the back one will be piped into the motor. Okay, you can see here that I'm making some progress with this heater core setup. I've done a little bit of surgery and I've changed around the mechanism just a little bit. This bracket right here was cantilevered more this way, but with this new heater core it was running into this hose here. So I left the original set screw and I just rocked the entire apparatus over and created a new hole right here. So now it's anchored right here, and that gives me room to offset this other pipe. What I'll do is I'll take the little cutoff wheel and cut this edge off here so that it doesn't run into the firewall. Now, as you can see, when you turn the hot and cold, this cable right here actuates both the fresh air door from cold to hot. It also shuts off the water. You have hot water coming in to the heater core. Well, when you turn your cold air on, you want all the heat to be gone, so it shuts this water flow off. And if you want to go back to hot, it opens up the valve again. So everything is working. It's got the right geometry. I had to bend this pipe a little bit, or this screw, this arm had to be bent. And then all I have left to do is to hook up a hose going through this shutoff valve into the hot water heater, and then a hose coming this into the firewall. Now what I'll be left with is two rubber hoses going from the heater core into the firewall, which attach to the engine for hot water. Okay, we're just about finished with the heater core here. You can see the piping that I played around with here. I wanted to keep the original shutoff valve that's attached to the cable that goes up to the control inside the cabin. So when you turn it to hot or cold air, it adjusts this trap door and this water inlet valve. So here you can see that I have the hot water coming in, this hose here through this valve. This valve is either on or off. When it's on, it flows into the heater core and then out, and will return back to the motor. Now typically you want to stay away from this much rubber hose inside the cabin because you may have a leak. You have more of a chance of one of these connections either leaking or eventually the hose getting broken on some level. Typically you want to have a heater core that has copper pipes that go right to the firewall, so there's much less of a chance of this dripping or leaking inside the cabin. Okay, we are doing a test fitting of this heater core, and I'm just making sure that all the plumbing here, the piping that I attached to the side, isn't going to interfere with anything. And so far it looks good. I'm going to do a little bit more work with this big, this is a big 3/4 inch hose. I think I'm going to make a splice right here and a more of a severe angle and come up and around with a copper elbow. But so far it looks like this is going to fit just fine. Spent some time cleaning the transmission. I didn't get a whole lot of video of working on cleaning up the transmission because it's kind of tedious, and all you're really doing is brushing on some gasoline and then hosing it down with some brake cleaner. Okay, we're looking at the bottom of the transmission pan, just looking for anything out of the ordinary. I see no chunks or pieces. Got the typical fuzz around the magnet. That's from the steels and the fibers. But that's not really that bad for 140,000 miles. So I'll clean this up. And then I ordered new gaskets. So I'll have to wait a few days for the gaskets to come in and we can put this back together. Okay, I have all the transmission parts pretty much cleaned up. Scoured them down with some gasoline, then sprayed them down with some brake cleaner. And they're about ready to be put back together. However, all I have to do now is replace some of the gaskets and some of the seals that I ordered for this transmission. There's a few of these little gaskets here that are for the shift bracket on both sides, and then I've got some bigger gaskets for a couple of the attachments here and there, as well as the pan gasket and a new fluid filter, a screen filter. So once I replace some of these gaskets and seals, we will start to put this transmission and transfer case back together. Well, it seems that I got the wrong fluid screen filter. It's a different, real similar, but not quite the right one for this application. So I don't know what that means. I entered the right numbers on the website for transmission parts. So what I'm going to do is just use brake cleaner to clean this out, and we'll reuse it. Not a big deal. It's not really a filter, it's just a screen to keep out chunks. And I'll just run some brake cleaner through this, it'll be fine. Okay, we got the coupler on between the transmission and the transfer case. Next, I'm going to replace these seals for the shifter bracket here. This is the shifter to put it in gear, and the rod that goes through the transmission runs through a couple of these gaskets, and this side was definitely leaking. So we're going to pull it apart and replace this one. Okay, there's a little bit of dirt around that shaft. I just want to make sure I didn't have anything fall into the transmission when I pull this seal out. Okay, well, it was a little bit too small to get the drill in there, but it actually chiseled right out. That's the old one. What I'm going to have to do is spend a little bit of time polishing that shaft, and then we will regoop it with a little bit of sealant. You can see here I've put the seal in, and I went ahead and gooped the outside with some sealant, and be sure to put a little bit of grease on the inside so that that shaft is running against a greased seal lip and not dry. And then I would just tap that down until it's flush with the body. But I did spend some time cleaning up the transmission, worked on the 4x4 shifter. I had to replace a bushing, and it was missing a pin bolt that held the kind of the bracket together, kind of the whole shifting mechanism together. So once I figured that out, it works great now. I spent some time creating a pin bolt for it, put it back together, put the bushing in it, and it works really nice. Okay, I'm working on this four-wheel drive shifter, and when I took the transmission and transfer case apart, I discovered it was missing a bolt that holds in the shifter assembly. The shifter assembly is attached to the handle that goes up into the cabin, and you move this back and forth and up and down to go from 2 high to 4 high to 4 low. Well, what had happened is this bolt for some reason is missing. I don't know whoever worked on it before didn't put it back in, or it came out somehow. Well, without that bolt being in there, that bolt is actually a special bolt that's going to have a small dowel at the end of the bolt that holds this assembly together in that groove. So without that bolt, when you'd shift it into four-wheel drive, it would just pull the whole shifting assembly apart and it wouldn't shift properly. So I'm doing a couple of things here. First of all, I'm going to create the bolt I need by cutting this one down and grinding the end into a post. That will go down and hold that together. And secondly, I'm going to add a bushing to the handle to make it tighter. The bushing that was in there broke apart and disintegrated and became sloppy. So I'm going to spend some time grinding on this bolt, and then we'll install this bushing, and then we'll be able to start putting that transfer case back together. So there's the general idea. It needs a pin at the end of that bolt that will go down and recess itself into the channel to keep this housing in place. So we will test fit this a couple of times and maybe grind off a little bit more if we need to. So you can see here that with the bolt in there now, it still can turn because it's got a pin in a groove, but it can't come out. So now when you put this shifter in here and shift it back and forth, it's running off of that. You can still turn it back and forth and up and down, but it won't pull the casing apart. Okay, here you can see we've got this four-wheel drive shifter pretty much fixed. Got a new pin bolt in here to keep this together. That keeps this section from coming out. So when you're shifting this into four-wheel drive, you have to follow this pattern right here. 2 high, up to 4 low, to 4 high. And as you go back and forth, it shifts that. And then as you pull this in and out, it clicks this back and forth. So I had to insert a new plastic bushing on this pin right here. The old one was brittle and cracked and broke in pieces as I took it apart. So now it's tight again. It seems to be fairly tight, almost too tight, so I don't know. I guess it's okay. Once you're in the car, you're going to have some more leverage on it to pop that back and forth. So it should be fine. Here's the boot that keeps the debris out of that joint. I'm going to go ahead and put a zip tie around that. Okay, one more project down. Now we can cut a gasket for this and put this back on the transfer case. Okay, next on the agenda is to put the shifter back on the transfer case here. All we have to do is line up this shifter finger with the tongs down here. Okay, so I was going to create a gasket for this out of just some generic Fel-Pro gasket paper. And what you would normally do is lay the pattern down there, trace it out, cut it out with a razor blade, and then use a hole punch just to punch out the bolt holes. Then you can make yourself gaskets. Because of the placement of this, I don't believe I need a gasket on it. I'm just going to use some RTV gasket maker. But we will cut out a gasket for this bottom door, this window, into the gearbox. So it's in two-wheel drive there, and if we go up and over, it's in four-wheel drive, and I can feel both of these axles turning. And then if you go up to four low, it spins the axles at a reduced rate. Okay, so next we're going to cut some gaskets for this window door into the side of the transfer case. And all we're going to do is just trace around it, punch out the holes, grease it up with some gasket maker, and slap that on there. Also, I'm going to test the switches here. These two switches tell the dashboard if you're in 4 high or 4 low. All it is a switch with an indent ball on the end, and when you shift this transfer case, it signals one or the other, and then lights up on the dash whether you're in 4 high and 4 low. I'm just going to test them to make sure they work. Essentially just continuity. It'll beep once there's continuity, so I'm going to attach this to the ground. I went ahead and took off both of these switches, the ones I was just testing for continuity, and they have a couple of issues. Now I will say real quick, when you take these off, they have the indent balls that will fall out. Be sure you don't lose them. It's a big ball bearing. that rides along a shaft on the inside of that transfer case, and when it hits an indent, it pushes this switch in and out. And consequently, you'll have a light that shows up on the dashboard that says 4 high, 4 low, etc. Okay, so I took both of these switches off, and they've got a couple of issues. The first issue is one of them is broken. One works fine, the other one is stuck. Second issue is both of them are missing a wire. You're supposed to have 2 wires coming off of this thing so that you get a flow through them, whether they're switched on or off. So I've got to figure out how to fix these. I either fix them or I have to buy some new ones. So that will be something I will spend some time on the internet tomorrow to see if I can figure these out. So next we're going to work on this gasket for this window plate. So that's all you're doing, is you're just cutting out a piece of gasket material, and then next we'll just hole punch for the bolts, and then we will put some sealant on it. So there you have the gasket. That will fit right on there, no problem. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to straighten out some of these holes a little bit. Whoever was in this transfer case before me reefed on these a little bit too hard, and the holes have indented just a little bit, enough to make it a little harder to seal. So all we're gonna do is just take a body dolly, put it behind there, and we'll just tap these down. Okay, it's pretty good, pretty straight. Okay, next we are replacing the axle seals for this transfer case. The output shaft going to the rear wheels and the input shaft going to the front wheels. And all I did was punched a hole in the edge of the old seal with a ice pick, and then just screwed in the slide hammer into that hole and tapped it out, and it pulls right out. Next we'll clean the surface of where the new bearing or the new seal goes in with some brake cleaner, and we will tap the new ones in. Very easy job, not very difficult at all. Okay, I just cut a new gasket for the transfer case here. And next we're going to put the transfer case onto the transmission, and we are one step away from putting this back in the car. So there you have it. The transmission and transfer case are finished, all put back together and ready to be put back in the car. We've replaced a bunch of gaskets and seals, and I fixed that four-wheel drive shifter on top, and everything is cleaned up. Got it scrubbed all the grease and dirt off of it, and it looks pretty nice. And we are going to attach that to the motor here within the next couple of weeks, I think. I also spent some time working on the inside of the car. I tore out the firewall insulation and padding. It was soaked with antifreeze and had kind of a mildewy smell to it. So that came out, and then I washed down the firewall with some soapy water. So I'm going to switch my attention to this firewall matting, this insulation, and I'm going to clean the whole firewall with some soapy water and prepare it to be put back together with all the fan boxes and the dash. So the first step I'm going to do is to start taking out some of this nasty antifreeze soaked insulation, and we're going to replace it. So here are the items I pulled out of the truck, and what we're going to do is use the old insulation as a pattern against this new insulation, and this is just the fiber backing that you can buy at any carpet store. It's cheaper than going on to an auto parts website and buying the actual carpet, auto carpet insulation. And you just get a similar thickness and get the fiber type from the local home carpet store. And we will lay this on top of it and mark out a pattern and cut new pieces. And then I will clean up that rubber piece that fits the firewall. I will wash it down and then peel off the insulation from the back of this and reapply, re-glue some new insulation. This here is pretty old and dusty and also full of antifreeze. Okay, you can see here that the dash is pretty clean now. Scrubbed it down with some soapy water and a rag, and I also attacked all the wiring and different fixtures that are underneath here. So I can start to put these air boxes back in and ultimately put this dash back in fairly soon. But as you can see, that this is one step closer to being done. You can see the bucket of soapy water that I was using to wash this dash is now frozen after it cooled down tonight. It's about 16 degrees outside. It's probably about 20 degrees in here. So that makes it kind of a bummer to work out here. So there you have it with episode 11 of my Dodge Raider project. Wasn't a real glamorous week of work, but we got a few things done. And coming up next episode, we're going to be putting this transmission into the car and maybe even the motor, get that motor put in. And then we're going on the downhill slope of this project. I imagine there's only about 6 or 8 more episodes and this thing will be wrapped up. So check back and we will be moving forward with some more progress next week.